What's up, everybody? How's that first day of on campus going? Yeah, I can see that. I keep getting emails from accessibility office like, hey, this student wants you to know that he's not going to be on campus at all, or he or she's not going to be on campus at all this year. And you need to make an exception for them. And I'm like, I wish you would just stop emailing me that. I'm not going to be on campus at all this semester. So I already decided that stuff long ago. Yep. I've been getting a lot of those emails, and I'm like, okay, thanks. Thanks for the spam. Student accessibility services. It's exactly what I need. Although I guess it's what I deserve for spamming you all with the 2019 quizzes a couple weeks ago. Not planning on going back to pay for housing when I can just stay at home. Showed up and was the only person in class today. Yeah, I know a lot of people were thinking like all the students are going to come back and there's going to be a huge outbreak and we're just going to have to send them all home again. Why are we doing all this work? And it's like, I feel like you're underestimating how many people are going to take advantage of this not going to class thing. Unfortunately, I read that all the downtown businesses are super suffering because they're like, I know at least 2 places downtown that make enough money during fall game season to actually like float for the rest of the year, and that's not happening this year. Yeah. Like I know Tadaro's Pizza, for example, he's actually said that. So I bet you there are a couple of bars as well. Who like, I mean, study hall is the most, God. I've had nothing but terrible experiences with study hall. Like, I don't know, I think it's a combination of the owners and the like people that actually go there, but like even the crowd that goes there is kind of an asshole. I don't know, like maybe individual people aren't, but just the ugh. I was so glad when they got chained by like South Carolina alcohol people. And like put chains on the doors and confiscated what, like $30,000 worth of alcohol or something. I don't know, but I was just like, good. I hate that place. Earth, Wind, and Fire Day. Somebody was telling me it's also Pecan Day or something. Queso Day, yep. And there was a Guacamole Day last week too. Okay. Earth, Wind, and Fire because it's related to this song. September. Okay. I'll add that to the list of things to watch after class. Don't get on me about not knowing my old songs. So I actually beat the final boss in Remnant from the Ashes this weekend. That was my weekend. Watched a little bit of football. That was about it. No, I'm not even going to attempt to sing that. All right. Anybody have any questions about, I guess it was project 2? I think I finally got all that stuff graded last night. If you have any questions or concerns, hit me up on Slack or just complain about me at the end of the year on the survey. All of that's cool. And I guess I'm going to start with some project 3 stuff today, which, when did I say this was due? Let me get this projected. Oh, it's due on Wednesday night still? All right, cool. Well, it's a simple thing. Like, the notes get you 85% of the way through it, and then you get to learn just enough Node.js on your own to make it an actual project that's worth points. So I still don't feel too bad. And we'll hopefully talk a little bit more about Node.js and Nginx beyond what the project description talks about around the end of class today. And then I'm thinking all of Wednesday will just be Node.js stuff and any questions about this project. So pretty sure Wednesday is going to be a light day. I might just, since Wednesday is going to be all Node.js, I might just touch a little bit on it and then call it today. I know y'all have all had a hard day with your first day back to campus. So I don't mind this being kind of an easy week. So I have done, to write these notes up, I did all of this on my server in AWS. So I'm not actually going to be implementing it, but I will show you what the end results are supposed to be on all these things. So let's just do browser and terminal. Well, okay. So I guess first, let me just talk a little bit about this project. We're switching from Apache 2 to Nginx. Nginx is kind of a more lightweight, slightly less configurable web server than Apache 2. You can't do as many things with modules. They're modules for damn near everything, and because of the way Apache works, it spins up a thread for each connection. And Node.js is more, you have worker threads that just grab certain events and stages off of a shared bus kind of thing. I mean, you can read more about the differences if you want, but that means that for a lot of lightweight stuff, for sharing static files, for proxying, which is what we're going to be using it for, and for a couple other things, Node.js is actually faster and easier to set up. You don't have tons of XML looking config files everywhere. A lot of times you just have one config file. It doesn't have any XML in it. It's a lot easier to understand. So we're switching to Nginx mostly because for this and for most of the other projects we host, we don't really need all of the extra stuff that Apache does for you. Apache's good to kind of know. It is the industry standard. And if you're doing heavy lifting workloads, like you want to run like a shibboleth or SAML single sign-on authentication, and then you want to run some PHP, and then you want to have like, I don't know, like mod rewrite and cookie injection and all this other stuff. If you want to do, or you want to run like WebDAV, you can use Apache for that. All of these things are a little bit more heavy lifting, and it may behoove you to have a thread per process. The problem with that I've run into, especially with proxying and Apache, is if the backend server just hangs up for some reason, like in our example, if Node.js crashes and we're proxying through Node.js through Apache, that thread's just going to hang around. And I've actually seen on www.clemson.edu, I've seen it take down the server because it ran out of available threads because it had some stupid proxy and the backend server was iffy and it caused just tons of issues. So we stopped doing proxying on those servers and said, look, if this is not the platform for you to be doing that. If you want to be proxying, you need to be doing it another way. The reason we're proxying at all is because Node.js or anything that runs on a port below 10,024 in Linux, so port 80 and 443 specifically for our purposes, any of those things, you have to run the process as root to get a hold of that. Certain things are a lot safer than other things to do that with. Apache and Nginx, I know Apache does this, I assume Nginx does as well. They have a cool startup process where they'll grab the port with just a very tiny thread, and then they will task out a ton of stuff to threads that are actually not running as root. So there's not much at all that that's exploitable. There's not a huge attack surface on the root thread. All it does is ask the operating system for that port and then gives control of that port to all the underlying threads that are not running as root. Node.js does not do this. Node.js will just continue to run its main process as root. And if for some reason an attacker were able to get some remote code execution through that thread, they now have remote code execution as root. So that's why you don't want to just, now you could like sudo node and actually run node as root and it would be able to grab port 80 just fine. Don't do that. That is hashtag bad practices, right? Like don't play around with that stuff because you don't know what sort of exploits are going to come out. You don't know how terrible people's code is going to be. They could actually try, like you could just do something stupid, like say you want to take in a URL that has some Git parameters at the end, and you want to use those Git parameters to look up a file in the operating system. And you do it a dumb way, and you actually shell exec, and then somebody actually puts like a semicolon at the end of their file name, and then can type arbitrary code after that. And so that's already a big problem, even when you're not running as root. But when you are running as root, now they can run arbitrary commands on your server as root without having to have a second exploit to actual permission escalation. So this is why we're running Node.js on port 3000, where it's safe. Anything above 1024, that's relatively safer. We're going to run it as our own user, I think. Actually, let me double check that. I might have to change the next project if, because I've been saying all this stuff, and a lot of what I had us do with the service stuff, I just want to make sure. ps-ef pipe, that's a dash, pipe grep node. Okay, it is running as the Ubuntu user. Good. All right. So I did actually do that right when I set up this project. It's been a day or three since I did that. Okay, so that all being said, anybody have any questions as to why we're using Nginx, why we're proxying? I'm going to talk more about proxying if you don't understand that term. This is actually specifically a reverse proxy. So there's two types of proxies, a forward proxy and a reverse proxy. A forward proxy is when you have, say, 15 computers on your network and you configure them all, I believe, with, there's just like in Linux, there's an environment flag. In Windows, you can just set something up to do this as well, where you say, instead of making requests to google.com or anything outside the network directly, I want you to send a proxy, HTTP proxy request to this proxy server that sits on the edge of the network. And then that will actually make the request for you and send the answer back to you. If you do that with HTTPS, then you have to tell your computer to trust that cert, and you get into cert signing issues because like no browser is going to trust that some random computer on the edge of your network is actually sending you the right SSL stuff. So sometimes you have to mess with a little bit of SSL, or you have to tell your browser to, like, maybe not your browser, you might can do it at the operating system, I'm not sure, but there is a HTTP proxy _proxy, and you just set that as an environment variable, and there's also an HTTPS one, and once that's set, it'll actually make a slightly different request. So it sends an HTTP request to this, and inside it, it says, it has like a header or something. It's like, here's where I actually want you to make a request to. So it's like a slightly different HTTP packet. It's not a packet with inside a packet like a VPN or something would be. So that's a forward proxy. That's all you need to know about it, except that generally speaking, forward proxies are kind of sort of evil and have generally caused me nothing but problems. You'll see a lot of places. One thing, for example, say you have like 5,000 computers on your network, and all of them, and they're all web servers, right? And they all need to go update their packages. So they all talk to the apt-get repos for Ubuntu, right? So if we do apt, sudo apt update, it's actually using HTTP and HTTPS to make all of these requests to pull down, hey, what are the available packages, right? When it's doing that, and you have 5,000 computers doing that, and from these servers' point of view, from the US East 1, EC2, archive, Ubuntu.com, from that server's point of view, all of those requests are coming from one IP address because they're all coming from the proxy server. It may decide that it's going to like slow you down, stop you from talking to them, think it's like a denial of service, not a distributed denial of service, because it's actually the inverse of a distributed denial of service. You're taking 5,000 requests and putting them all behind one IP instead of doing the other thing. So you can actually get like slowed down, blacklisted, all kinds of things. Like it's forward proxy really just causes tons of problems. So hopefully you're not in a place where you need to use that. And hopefully if you are in a place where you need to use that, you're getting paid a lot of money. Veteran Affairs. So yeah, what we're talking about is a reverse proxy. That goes on the other end. So you send your request over the wide internet, right? Just as a regular request that goes over the internet like normal. It gets to port 80 on our example. Our request gets to port 80, which is running Nginx, and Nginx takes that packet, rewrites a new packet, and sends it to itself on port 443. It could send it to another server on port, or not 443. It could send it to another server or itself, any IP and port pairing. It will do its own SSL handshake. And there are a couple of good things about that. One, we've already talked about, you don't need to run Node.js as root. Another one is you could actually have 5 of these web servers, and you could load balance between all 5 of them and have one Nginx that's kind of a really dinky load balancer that just says, all right, well, this request goes to that server, that request goes to that server. And as long as your requests always go to the same backend server, like as long as my specific requests always go to the same backend web server, so that sessions are reused and all that stuff, like, whatever. We'll talk about sessions later, but sometimes that's not even necessary. But generally speaking, you're not going to have any issues with that conversation. And additionally, you can put your SSL certs on your one Nginx box, even if you have 500 boxes behind it. So this is like reverse proxying, kind of goes hand in hand with technologies like layer 7 load balancing, that kind of stuff. Like www.clemson.edu has a big beefy thing called a F5 Big IP local traffic manager. And it's this hardware accelerated huge thing with 100 gig NICs in it. And it actually exposes tons of virtual IPs to the network. And you point your DNS for www at that virtual IP. And then it does a reverse proxy to all of the www web servers behind it, which I think right now we have like 3 or 5 or something. And if all those go down, it'll start sending traffic to the 3 that run out in California that are already up and running. So it also, to maintain that stickiness, it'll inject a cookie into the return traffic and use that cookie when it comes back to say, oh, I told you last time this browser talked to me, I told it it was talking to server 2 out of my 5 servers. So I'm going to, and then it sent me a new request and it had that same cookie in it. And I can read that cookie and say, oh, you were talking to server 2 before. Let me send you to server 2 again. So it can do these sort of things because as a reverse proxy, it has full visibility into the entire HTTP packet. There is no SSL connection all the way through between the browser and Node.js or whatever's behind the reverse proxy. It stops at the reverse proxy. It stops at Nginx, and also the IP address source and destination change. So that's when we get into like X forwarded for headers and stuff, which I'll talk about a little bit later today. But that's enough background on that. Anybody have any questions before I get into this project rundown? Let's see if I can maybe, I'm going to see if I can make this a little bit smaller. And can I go over reverse proxy again? Yeah. So with a reverse proxy, I sent my HTTP request from my browser to port 80 on my web server. Nginx owns port 80 on my web server. It gets that request, like that's where those are the two ends of the TCP connection that's carrying our HTTP or HTTPS packet. So as far as the browser is concerned, the Nginx web server has gotten the HTTP request, it's decoded it, the three-way TCP handshake was completely done. Optionally, if it were 443, it's even done all the SSL handshake and stuff. So the browser thinks it's talking to a web server on port 80. That's fine. As soon as the Nginx gets done reading that HTTP packet, it goes around and makes a new, slightly different packet to another IP address and port number, which we get to define arbitrarily, right? So when it does that, it sends off a new packet it's almost identical, but it's going to have like the TCP connection source and destination, IP and port numbers are going to be different. And the SSL connection is going to be different, stuff like that. And it may inject some headers into this new packet that were not in the original packet. So it creates a whole new HTTP packet. So it's like, all right, hold on right there, browser. I'm looking for your answer right now. And then on its other hand, it sends a packet in our scenario, it sends a packet to localhost:3000, which is Node.js. And then Node.js is just a regular web server as well. It gets its HTTP request packet, it creates an HTTP response packet, sends it back to Nginx, and then Nginx takes that packet, makes a few changes to make it back the way it needs to be, and sends it back out the door. It's a reverse proxy because it wasn't there back in the day when they first had proxy. Like the original proxy was a forward proxy where everything funnels through one server to get off the network. And then they came up with this idea where instead of having the thing that takes a HTTP packet and makes a new HTTP packet on its other hand, that idea is the same thing, but instead of having it really close to the source, you have it really close to the destination, the actual web server, not the client. So the reverse proxy is close to the web server. Forward proxy is close to the client browser. But they both do the same thing. They get an HTTP request, they maybe make a few changes or not, and then they send it to another server. And then they get that server's response and they send it back to the client. Did that make more sense this time? All right, cool. So let's go to this browser thing and let's start talking about how the hell we get our stuff to do that. So I'm going to skip over the requirements. We'll get back to that at the end of this discussion. First, we just need to talk about the setup. So, yep, just like usual, you need to do your update and your upgrade. And this is just to make sure things are patched, right? This is not a requirement for like actually running this code or whatever. It's just to make sure you should be patching your system at some regular interval. I just happened to make that regular interval for us, our new projects, right? So update it, upgrade it. Then we call this command. So curl is actually going to make an HTTP request to dbn nodesource.com setup14.x, which returns a shell script. And we pipe that return into bash and we run it as sudo. And all that does is it adds a new repository to this thing. So if we go back and look, if we go back and look at this, one of the things that it is talking to on my server is actually debian.nodesource.com. When I do sudo apt update up here, one of the things it gets repository information is for, hey, what packages are available for me to download, is actually this Debian node source, deb nodesource.com node 14. That's there because I already ran this line. So now apt knows to go talk to this new endpoint because we don't like the node that's currently in regular Ubuntu repositories. It's normally out of date. It's used to be called Node versus Node.js or Node.js versus Node. So like you wouldn't, normally you would run things with node space file. For some god awful reason, and I don't know if this is still the case, but like 2 years ago, the thing that comes out of the normal baked Ubuntu repos calls itself Node.js instead of Node. And it's just like, why? And it's also horribly out of date. Like last time I checked, Node's running on like 14 or 16, and the last one was like version 8. A lot of normal packages require at least version 10, and they think that's legacy. So we don't want to mess with that stuff, right? And so now that we have this node source thing in there, we can actually just say, hey, go install Node.js. And also say, go install Nginx. We didn't have to add any other repos to our system to install Nginx because Nginx in the Ubuntu repos is actually fairly well up to date. So this is just us installing Nginx and Node.js, and then we don't have to reboot here, but because we did an upgrade that may have actually patched our kernel, to apply those updates, we go ahead and reboot. So these top two and the bottom one are there mostly for patching purposes. They aren't necessarily there as a requirement for this project, but please go do it. And then, so Apache's running on port 80 right now. If we tried to turn on Nginx, it's probably gonna crash. So we disable Apache, we enable Nginx. So enable is not start, stop, right? So you can do service start, stop, and restart. And then you can also do systemctl enable and systemctl disable. And I'm gonna make this a little bit, go back to the browser so it's a little bit bigger. So enable Nginx actually says when this server turns on, I want you to start Nginx. Disable Apache 2. When this computer turns on, I no longer want you to start Apache 2. And then we tell sudo service Apache 2 to stop. So this actually turns off Apache 2 because after our reboot, up here, Apache 2 turned on because it's enabled by default. And I'm not sure if Nginx is enabled by default, and it doesn't hurt even if it is enabled by default to run this again. So just to be sure, we're going to enable it. And then we disable Apache 2 so that it won't start again next time we reboot, and we stop it now because disabling it by itself doesn't stop the service. And then once Nginx is installed, we have these default configuration files. So you can use Vim, you can use Nano, whatever your command line, text editing software, Emacs, butterfly wings, I don't care. You can use whatever you want, but Vim's the thing that I know how to use. So at least the thing that I know how to partially use. I still don't know if anybody knows how to really use all the stuff. I know one person that knows how to use Vim for every single ounce that it's worth, but most people just know how to use it to get their work done, not know how to like fly on it. All right, so let's just take a look at what that file looks like. Sudo vim etc nginx sites enabled. And if we look at etc nginx, let's do that first. lsla and etc nginx. And so it's got all these things. It's actually got a top-level comp file. It's got mods enabled, mods available. This is kind of the same setup that Apache had in its etc conf, right? So it's got all these available and enabled. And if we go look at something like sites enabled, right? It's actually the same way Apache works. It's just a symlink to the sites available. So if we delete something out of sites enabled, the configuration file still exists in sites available. Same thing for mods enabled. If we go look at that. Mods enabled. Modules. So this has got the same thing. If you delete something out of modules enabled, it will still be around. But symlinks allow you to edit them. So notice down here in our browser, we said we're editing the sites enabled file. Yes, that is a symlink to sites available file, but we can edit that this way. So just so you guys, I guess, so that you aren't jumping through hoops like, wait, I changed the available one, but it automatically changed the other. Just go change it doesn't matter which one you change. Changing either one, the available one or the enabled one, will work just fine. It's only deleting things that this protects you from, right? So sudo vim etc nginx sites enabled, and there's only one file in there, so it's default. So we got all this stuff in here. This is the top of the file. I'll make this a little bit bigger. There we go. All right, so at the top of the file, this is such an easier config file to read, right? Like you have a server and you have a curly bracket, right? And you're telling it to listen on port 80, and you're telling it to listen on the IPv6 version of port 80. That's kind of what that little bracket thing there means. We tell it, hey, I want your root file system to be var www.html. This is equivalent to document root in Apache, right? So in Apache, we said, hey, your document root is var www.html. Here, the exact same result, you just say root instead of document root. This is nice because all those static files that you have in var www.html that were being served through Apache, they'll now be served through Nginx without you having to do anything different. We tell it what kind of index files, so if we end a path with just a slash, it will actually go and look for an index.html and index.htm. All these things, that's fine. Server name, we leave this blank or underscore for now. If we wanted to define multiple virtual hosts, like with Apache, you can do multiple virtual hosts. If you recall, like Facebook has millions of web servers for one host name, whereas like people.clemson.edu has 7,000 host names for one web server. So to accomplish that, you give each server block, or in Apache, each virtual host block, you give it a server name. And so you come in with a host header. Just like in Apache, if I had a host header of craigb.people.clemson.edu, it knows to run a different server block that probably has a different root, right? And this is the same thing here. This server name tells it, hey, if I come in with a host header of blah, do this. We only have one server block, so we use underscore, and that's just like any host name, run this server block. I don't really care. I do believe it's in order as well, so you can have more specific ones and then a default one if you really wanted to. We're skipping all this because we aren't doing multiple virtual hosts, so it doesn't really matter. And this block was already there. So this is saying, hey, for any, and this is also position specific. So if I put this location block below this one, like this one is kind of a catch-all. It's like, if you hit anything that starts with slash and no other specifying information after that, then try to find this file, and if not, return a 404. This was already in there. You don't have to worry about it. This is just what serves up the stuff from root, all of your static files, your project 3 or project 2 directory, all that stuff. This is the part I added. And I actually added a second line that's not in my documentation. So this is the only line that is really required. This one is so that I can show you guys a little bit more about how reverse proxying works when we get to the Node.js side. You can add this in. It's not going to hurt anything. You can leave it out. It's not going to hurt anything. If you've already turned in your project, I have no way of knowing that you did this or not. This is only so that this actually injects a header into the packet before it sends it to Node.js. And the contents of that header is the name of the header is x-forwarded4, and the contents are the real IP address of the client. Because remember, it's making a totally separate TCP and HTTP request to go to Node.js. So when Node.js sees every single packet that gets to it, the source IP address that Node.js sees is going to be 127.0.0.1, right? Everything is coming from Nginx that goes to Node.js. So if you want Node.js to know the real client IP address, you have to do this little trick and say, all right, take the packet, add an extra header into the packet before you send it to the backend web server, and that extra header will contain the real client IP address. It doesn't break anything because Node.js is still going to reply to 127.0.0.1 whatever Nginx port, right? It's still going to reply to that. But if you wanted to do logging, if you wanted to say like, oh, people from this region can get to this or this people can't, if you wanted to say, oh, hey, you know, for logging purposes, I actually want to know all the different client IPs that are hitting my web server, all of those things, that's when you would use X-forwarded for. If you're in a production environment, it is always good to have this, because there have been multiple times where like I have seen a web server under attack or doing something stupid or have bad code that it sends to the client, and then the client starts doing a loop and just sending tons of data to the front or to the web server or something like that. And you want to be able to just like block off a stupid IP or some Russians or, you know, Chinese or whatever. Anybody that's attacking you, you would like to be able to stop those IPs from coming at you. But if your web server is not logging this already before it starts getting hammered, you have no idea what IPs are even still talking to you. I mean, you can block IP addresses, but you need to know what IP addresses to block first. And so in a production environment, it's always very good to make sure that all of your backend web servers are aware and logging the real client IP addresses. Could you configure Nginx to log it and block certain IPs? Yes, you can configure Nginx to log it and block certain IPs. I think there's a way to do that with like a calm down or I forget what the term is, but yeah, I believe there are modules that you can be like, hey, if this guy hits too many times, then start throttling their connection. And honestly, you can say, so even without logging the IP that goes to the backend web server, unless you have tons and tons of traffic, you can say like tons and tons of legitimate traffic. You can look at, okay, well, I saw these 10 requests in Node.js or whatever the backend web server is at these timestamps, and then I can look in the access logs for Nginx and find the IP addresses there. That kind of works, right? But it's an extra step that if your whole shit's on fire because somebody's doing something mean, you don't want to have to go correlate logs between those two things. It's so much easier if the backend service already has it. Are there other ports we would need to define to host the other projects? How would the location definition change for other? Okay, so yeah, this location is saying, all right, if you get a path that starts with project 3 and also has dynamic in it, because we have we'll set up a project 3 folder in var www.html. So we want the project 3 base folder to continue to follow this pattern here, right? We just want it to be served up like a regular static file. But if it's dynamic, which is the part of this project that needs to go to Node.js instead, then that's the only time you forward to port 3000. So for project 4, we're going to have another one of these blocks, and it's just going to have project 4 here. But all of this is still listening on port 80, so we don't have to open any more security groups. We don't have to do anything like that. It's all going to flow into port 80, and then we'll just add more blocks to this as we have more Node.js stuff running in the background. Yeah, project 2, it's already going to exist because it does not fit any of the location blocks above this, so it'll go down to this location block, and that location block loads var www.html, which has a project 2 folder, so that will work without us changing this file at all. This is the only addition we've made to this file. Everything else should work, and all of your static files are going to work. No proxying needed for project 1 or 2. All that stuff's still going to exist just fine. No problem. Okay, so to recap, you don't need this line if you've already turned it in. If you've already gotten past this point and you haven't turned it in, I don't care. You can leave this line out. It is nice to have. You should remember to set exported for if you're ever doing something in the real world, and not only set it, but make sure that the backend web service or web server is using it and logging it correctly, because a lot of times they don't do that by default. So just because you're sending it doesn't mean it's not just happily logging, yeah, I got requests from localhost. I got more requests from localhost. And you're just like, I'm sending you the header. Could you please log it? Like you have to do a little bit of extra configuration, and it depends. Like if it's a Java Spring app, or if it's a PHP, or if it's Node.js, or whatever the hell, some third-party application that doesn't actually let you control the web server. hopefully they have like a flag in their deployment code or something like that. So please do export it for in the future when you're in the real world. This is the only thing you need here. Okay, and these 4 lines or 3 lines, whatever, those are the only things we need to add. And we'll add more later on for other projects here. Okay, so that was a lot of talking. Yep, got all that. Okay, and now since we changed the configuration file, we have to restart our Nginx to get it to pull up the configuration file. So sudo service Nginx restart, and just it doesn't tell us that it worked, that it didn't. If you want to check that it worked, that you don't have any config problems, sudo service Nginx status. And it says here, hey, it's active, it's running, here's some logs. Although you can't really read much, you could go look deeper into that. If you do that, you are now in an editor. You're in a less kind of editor. So you just hit Q, and that takes you back out of it. But this tells you kind of the processes that are running, the PIDs, all that fun stuff. The most important thing is it says it's running. It's got a nice little green dot up here. Awesome, yay, it's running. It didn't crash on start. Okay, then down here, back to the browser. Down here we make some directories. This -p, maybe you guys have done like make a project 3 directory and then make a document root directory inside that and then make a 3rd folder inside that. -p just says make any directory that doesn't exist all the way down. So I haven't made a project 3 directory before I ran this, but I'm telling it to make a document root directory inside project 3. And with the -p tag, it's like, oh, well, I don't have a project 3 directory, so I guess I'll make that too. And then we don't need the -p tag here. You can, or flag here, you can add it here. It's not going to break anything. A lot of times you kind of just always want to use a -p flag, just so that it'll make whatever you want it to make and not ask you any questions, give you any crap. So this is kind of our folder structure. We have our project 3 folder in our home directory. Let's go back over here, ls ... So here we have our project 1, 2, 3 directory. We are in home Ubuntu. So we're in our ~/ kind of thing. If we go into project 3, have these 2 things. We have document root and server. I set it up this way because we don't want our Node.js source code to end up in var www.html. We only want some of the files in project 3 to end up in var www.html, because eventually later on we may have like database credentials or something like that in our source code. We don't really want people on the great wide internet to be able to see the source code of our server process. I mean, I want to see the source code of your server process when you submit it, so, you know, but we don't want any Joe Schmo on the internet to see that. So if I do, and so the next line down here, the sudo ln-s, that's doing another symlink, right? And we've talked about symlinks before, ls-la var www.html. All right, so now we see that here I have project 1 is a symlink that's pointing to my home directory project 1 folder. Project 2 is a symlink that points to my home directory project 2 folder. These allow me to make changes in my projects 1 and 2 folder, and they show up in var www.html without me having to do a sudo copy or anything like that. I can just scp files into my project 2 directory and it shows up in the web server view. Remember, Nginx is still pointing at var www.html for everything except for the dynamic path. Okay. And then project 3, I didn't just point it at project 3, because if I did that, then this server folder up here with my server code would also be visible to browsers on the internet, or anybody without a browser that just knows how to make HTTP packets. We don't want that. So we actually have a subdirectory, we have a document root, and this is actually what shows up when I go to base project 3 in my browser. So if I go up here and do this, and then I go to this, I look at project 3, it says project 1 because, okay, wait, browser, okay. It says project 1 because I'm super lazy and I just copy my project 1 HTML file into project 3, and you can totally do that because all you need is some valid HTML file here. I don't really care what it is. This is like super easy. Don't get too stressed out. Don't worry about overdoing it. And if I go look at my project 3 document root, I just have an index.html file. And if I cat the contents of that, we see that it's exactly what we see here. It says project 1, it's got a link in it because that's what project 1 required. I didn't put a color on here like I made you guys do, or an image on here like I made you guys do, because I'm lazy, you know? And I didn't have to turn it into myself. So that's how that works. Now, if I try and over here go to, let me see if I can get that. Let me just prove my point. If I go to project 3/server, that doesn't exist. We don't know what server is. Also, it's handy that it says, hey, this is an Nginx server. If you get a 404 and it's not from Nginx, you know that you're probably still running Apache and you need to do some starting and stopping and stuff, right? So nice that it tells you that. A little extra breadcrumb to follow if you run into that specific problem. Okay. That's why our folder structure is the way it is. That's our symlink. Hopefully all of this stuff says all of the things that I've said, so you don't necessarily have to go back and watch this video if you don't want to. All right, so in here, we do an npm init. This is actually something you run on your command line. npm is Node Package Manager. Yes, Node has its own package manager, just like apt or apt-get or whatever. There's also npm. Node Package Manager installs Node packages. You guessed it. So the packages that we actually want to install, we will do it later, but we use npm init to make a package.json file. So if I go into my server and switch back over to terminal, if I go into my server folder and I'm just going to, so if you see here, there's a packages, and we can ignore this thing. So there's a package.json. I made this file myself when I was testing stuff. There's a package lock.json, and then there's a node modules. And actually, we don't even need DB. That's for the next project. And go ahead and get rid of that one as well. Okay. That's not RM. Less. There we go. All right. So this is what will eventually be in there. For you guys, it'll be an empty directory right now. So let's look at what the eventual, just so I'm actually, you know what, rm-f package star and rf node modules. Okay, so we don't have anything in there. Npm init. All right. What's the name? I want to name this project 3 version, and this, so it asks you versions and stuff like that because when you create a package.json file, it's like 80% of what you need to turn whatever code you're writing into another npm package as well. So a lot of these questions are like, hey, if you actually wanted to turn this into another node package that other people can download, you kind of need to tell us like, what version are you on? 1.0 is fine. Description, project 3, description, blah, blah. Okay. Entry point, server.js. Yours won't know what the entry point is because you don't have a server, you don't have any JS files. So you will have to type server.js or index.js or whatever you want. Normally it will default to index.js. I named mine server.js just because like a lot of times index.js gets people confused, like, wait, is this the server-side index.js or one of the index.js's that I'm sending to the browser for like tic-tac-toe client-side JavaScript thing? So I call it server.js just so it's like explicit, yes, this is the code that Node runs, not the code that gets sent to the browser. Test command, don't have one, not testing. Git repo, don't have one, not adding one. Keywords, nope. Author, nope. License, sure, don't care. Is this okay? So this is the file it's going to create. It's got a name, it's got the version, it's got all this descriptive stuff. It has its main server.js. This is kind of the only important part, because when you do starts and stops, it's going to run server.js. Okay, yes, that's fine. Notice there's no packages defined in here. And this thing's called Node Package Manager, and it created a package.json file. So what's the point of all this, right? Well, now we can do this handy command, npm install express, and --save. The --save actually adds express to the package.json file. So now it says, hey, this has a dependency. You need Express, and you need it to be at least version 4.17. Now it will, this little caret, there's a couple of different things in versions. This caret means use anything that's at least version 4.17 and can go all the way up to anything as long as you don't do a major revision change. So normally major revision changes break stuff. So it will grab 4.99 or 4.9000 or whatever. It won't grab any 5. anythings. I think that's how the caret works. Most of the time, it will correct. If you don't do -save, it will not write this thing into here. Not that it needs it, because your Node application itself is not going to read packages.json. Your Node application is actually going to look in this Node modules folder. In fact, if it doesn't find a Node modules folder here, it will look at one. It'll look for one in the project 3 directory, in the home directory, and a couple of other places on your file system. NPM is nice in that way because you can have a project 3 and a project 4 and a project 5. And each one of them can have their own dependencies installed local to this file structure, right? So server.js, when I say require express, it's going to look in the closest node modules folder it can find, which is in its same directory. It's going to find, look inside of it. Express.js has a lot of its own dependencies. What do you know? So I installed Express.js. It installed all of this other crap for us. The cool thing about, and so there's just tons of files. Like if I don't want to take all of this, say if I wanted to put it in a GitHub repo, or I wanted to copy it into a project 4 directory, I wanted to back it up on my local file system so I have a record of all the projects I've worked on and I can use them at work or something like that, you know? Like I want to save all this stuff, right? I don't want to save all of this specific, I don't want to save node modules. I don't, like, it's hundreds, it's maybe even thousands of files in here. I don't want all of this crap. rm-rf node modules. Okay, so now I can just do npm install. I don't have to specify anything. If I do npm install with no flags, no save, no install express, or whatever other packages I want, it will just go look at package.json and be like, oh, here are the dependencies I need. Okay, cool. That means you can delete your node modules folder, pick up all the rest of your stuff, including package.json, move it to a new server, and just run npm install, and it'll get all the same stuff. A lot of times I recommend changing this up here to something a little bit more exact. If you're trying to go from like, okay, well, I wrote this locally, it tested it out in our dev tier, I want to make a commit to master branch, and I want that to get pushed out to our prod tier, you might want to lock this down to an exact version. Get rid of the caret in the front so that it only ever gets 4.17.1. That gives you a little bit more dependability. You know that if somebody upstream commits some broken code for some reason, your app is going to work exactly the same because it's always going to get 4.17. So if you're doing this sort of thing with package.json, and you want to have a very, very, like, this will run exactly the same in production tomorrow as production a year from now, as dev did yesterday, and if I, you know, maybe I deployed it to production and we had 3 web servers, and then 2 months later we had 2 more web servers, and they're all reverse proxy load balanced. When I create those other 2 web servers 3 months from now, and I pull in this package and do npm install on it, I want it to grab the exact same stuff that's on the other 2 web servers. Just so that things are the same, right? So In production environment, you might want to consider removing that caret. There's other things you can do with dependency versions. You can just Google how node dependency characters and stuff like that work. But for what we're doing, it's not going to break anything. You can leave it exactly the same. When you go to project 4, you just copy all the stuff in these directories into your project 4 directory, minus your node modules, and you do npm install again, and boom. And then if you want to add more packages, we will have some more packages being used in project 4. You just do you'll do an npm install, and then an npm install whatever other package we need, -- save, and it'll write that new package to the project.json or package.json. Everything will be happy. Okay. All right, I got 20 minutes. This is taking longer than I thought. I lied to you guys and told you to get out early today. My B. Okay, so now I wanted you to go look at this documentation. I've had a couple of questions about this documentation. You just need to copy this code. When you copy this code, this part right here, don't worry about it. This 4.17.1, it actually won't show up when you copy it. So if you Control C, it's actually, I don't know why the hell they added this version to this code, like to this code viewer, because it's doing nothing but confusing people. This is not pure Node.js. Couple of words on Node.js, it's pretty much, it's almost as versatile as Python. You can use it for file I/O. You can use it for doing random TCP stuff that has nothing to do with HTTP. You can do non-TCP. You can do UDP. You can do like all kinds of cool stuff with Node.js. We're using the Express package to give us a Node.js experience where we don't have to deal with all the fundamentals, all right? In normal Node.js, you get a TCP connection and you pass a callback to it. And then you have to do stuff with that TCP connection to be like, all right, what path are we looking for? What are this? You know, Express actually lets us say, hey, if you get something going to / then call this function. This is a fat arrow function. We all remember what that is. It's got 2 arguments, the request object and the response object. Conveniently called rec and res to confuse the hell out of people. Res is what you use, response object is what you use to respond back to the client. Request object, surprise, surprise, has all of the request information about what the client sent to you. So this is registering an endpoint inside Express. If you want to, actually, let me, before I show that, where is my code? Okay. So I'm just going to get rid of the, no, that's fine. That's, all right. I'll give you guys. So how would this look without the arrow notation? You would just define a function the same way you did in your client. So you don't have to use function notation. For example, this could be function, and then get rid of that. That works the exact same way, right? I mean, arrow notation is so much nicer. I'm just saying. Or if you want to, and I've actually done this, once your functions get really big, you might want to have all of your registration stuff at the bottom of your file, and you might want const hello world handler equals this, right? And then here we just pass in the variable hello world handler. So then you actually, once you have tons of like 300-line functions, you can put them at the top. You can actually pull them in from other JavaScript files. So you just have like a top-level index.js that requires another, here's all my handlers file, or like here's my handlers for this part of the API, here's my handlers for that part of the API. You require all of those things kind of the same way that you require up here. It's a little different. We'll talk about that later. But yes, you can start separating out groups of functions into groups of files and then pull them in using a require function at the top, and then you just pass them into each of these handlers, all right? So this works exactly the same way as functions do in our previous projects, your tic-tac-toe stuff. I just like that fat arrow notation goodness. So res.send, here's that stuff. This is also, just like a lot of stuff we've been talking about today, this is positionally aware. So if I define, no, I don't think it is. So this, I think this is right. I'm not sure. But I think if this goes above that, then nothing is ever going to hit this one. Does that make sense? Because everything's going to catch this one up here. So we want the star to be at the bottom. There, you can do a lot of other cool stuff. For example, I can actually do something like this, and I want to say like books / I think it's colon. Let me go express generator, blah, 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 basic routing. No, no, user, yep. No, don't care, next. All right, well, I forget how to do it. I think it's colon, but you can basically say like ID, and it might actually be like ID like that. We'll get into how to tell it that this is a variable later. But then inside your request object, you can do const ID equals rec dot params dot ID. So this will actually grab like any URL that starts with books and ends in another string. It doesn't have to be a number because we didn't tell this variable that it had to be a number. You can do like some regex in here, I think, if you wanted to make it only be a number. But then we grab this ID, so now it's like, oh, you wanted books 22? Okay, cool. You wanted books 25, you wanted books 9099, you wanted books ASDF, I don't care. It's always going to run this function, and now we've parameterized an argument inside our URL. Right? So we do a lot of cool stuff with app.get. And by the way, what do you think this .get means? You have to use backticks to reference a variable? No, I don't think so. Let me Google express params. I think params is the right thing. Oh, it is colon. All right, I was right. Yes, get is listening for a get request, and this is the correct way to do it. You don't have to use backticks here. That backtick stuff that I was talking about, actually, that's this right here. So this is identical to this. Right? So what I've done here is this bottom one is saying path was, space at the end, and then plus rec.path. So rec.path is just the path of the request. It's like /books/123 or /ASDF or whatever, right? So this is the same thing as this. This is just called a template string. This uses backtick notation, right? So normally you use double quotes or single quotes. Backticks are nice because you don't have to have all these pluses adding things together. And honestly, like probably 1/5 of the time when I'm adding strings together like this, I always forget this little space here, and it's super annoying, but I never forget that space when I'm doing backticks, you know? It's just a little, like, just a little extra help is all I need, right? So that's backticks. All these things you don't need backticks for as far as I know. Nope, it just reads a regular string. So we say, and it parses this out. It says, all right, you were looking for a colon ID. The colon is a variable. I think if you actually wanted a colon in your URL, I don't even know if that's a URL compatible thing. It might have to be URL encoded, so don't worry about it. We won't go there. Yes, this listens for GET requests to book/ID. Eventually, we will also be using app.post and app.put and app.delete, which will listen for other types of HTTP requests. We don't have to deal with that right now. So this is the hello world code, right? So that's one of the things you have to do with your project. This is another thing you have to do with your project. Tell me what the path was if it's anything but the /one or the time one. So now you just have to set up a time one, right? All you have to do is do apt-get /time and define a callback that sends through res.send the date time, whatever time it is right now. That's 80–90% of this project already done for you. Okay. So that's a little bit about Node.js. Now let's talk The star one just prints out path was blah, not the actual path. That's if you use double quotes. If you use backticks like I have here, yes, you have to use the backtick, the thing above tilde, or the thing that's also the tilde key. If you wanted to use single or double quotes, you have to break out of the quote and then have a plus between them, right? Okay, cool. So yeah, you don't have to do it this way. You can just say quote, path was, quote, plus rec.path. And if you do it that way, you don't need this fancy $ curly brace. You just reference rec.path the same way you reference, rec is an object, rec.path is a key inside that object. It stores your path. Okay. And if we go back and look at the browser, and I go find my project again, I go to project 3 dynamic ASDF, right? It says, hey, your path was ASDF/ASDF. Huh, well, that's weird, because I went to project 3 dynamic ASDF. This means that's kind of what we want it to happen, right? Though, because we don't want to have to put project 3 dynamic into every single one of our apt-get paths in Node.js, right? Because then when we copy this code to project 4, right, then we have to go back and change all of our paths in our server code in this thing here. Like, we don't want to have all this. No, this window. Oh God, it went away. Where's my window? What is going on? Oh, it's really broken now. Okay. There we go. All right, kind of. God, that's horrible. Oh, it's really broken. Okay, cool, great. So, no. What I'm saying is Node.js is actually stripping off some of that path for us. So look, we don't have to have project 3 dynamic here, because when we tell Node.js to print out the path, it actually already thinks the path is just /ASDF, right? So this is really cool. This means that Nginx, when we set up that proxy, let's look at how that looked, because we did something when we set up that proxy with the location block that actually made this work. So if we go up here and we look at this location, we did proxy pass and we ended it with a slash. And this proxy pass command is smart enough to know if you end it with the slash, it will actually remove this path from the new packet it sends to Node.js. So when this sends a new packet to Node.js, it doesn't send a packet that contains the path project 3 dynamic ASDF. It cuts off all of this stuff and just sends /ASDF, which is really nice, because now, well, yeah, let's just get rid of that. Y'all don't need to see that extra 2 seconds that I wrote for you. All right, why is this like completely busted? Okay, it's back. All right, so if we go to this, now like we don't have to put project 3 dynamic in here because Nginx is smart enough to strip that off for us. That means that we can take all this stuff and we can copy it to project 4 later, and we don't have to change project 3 for project 4, right? So all that's really cool. Thanks a bunch, Nginx. You've been a great help. Well, let's go back to browser. What else did I need to talk about? All right, yeah, so a service, and this is the last thing I'll talk about today. Node.js, if you just run it in the foreground. And so let's go back to this. Okay, sudo service stop project 3 stop. Okay, so this is, since I stopped that service, which I'm telling you just that, like, I've already set this up on mine. So all this stuff down here on the web page that you can't really see. Scroll up. Yeah, there we go. All this stuff, editing the systemd file and putting this stuff in there, all this stuff, you haven't done it yet. So your system, so I have on mine, so that's why I had to stop that, right? So now if I try and run my server, node server.js, and it just sits there, and it sits there in the foreground. I can't do anything. I can't vim my server. I can't do anything like that. Doesn't work because it's in the foreground, right? So I have to control, whenever I'm done, I have to control C it and I get my command prompt back. I could also run it with an ampersand at the end, which is awesome, right? Now it's actually running in the background and I can do more stuff. I can vim stuff, all that stuff. I still need to kill it though. So like, let's say I edited my file. Now how the hell do I restart this thing? We'll have to do like foreground or something like that and then control C it. Or I have to do like ps-ef pipe grep node, and then I have to do kill 2.1. What is it? I forget which one it is. 201. No. 21060. Yeah. So now I killed it. Now it's not running anymore. Yay, awesome. So I can kill it by process ID using the PS command. I can hit FG to bring it back to the foreground. So if I run it again and send it to the background, awesome, it's running in the background. What happens if I try and run it again? PS-A, yeah, probably. I don't know. There's 800 different ways to do stuff in Linux. I just know my way. I'm not telling you you have to do it that way. But if I try to run it again, you're going to get an error like this. The part of this error, because there's a lot of stuff going on in here, the part you really need to worry about is adder in use, address already in use :3000. So I have a node process already running. I can't run another process that's trying to grab the same port. Linux doesn't let two things grab the same port. I want it to be on port 3000. There's already something on port 3000, and it's not going to work. So I have to get back to my process and kill it. Control C. Awesome. One other cool trick is you can run it in the foreground and then be like, oh crap, I kind of wanted to run that with an ampersand at the end. I can do Control Z, and that zombifies it, Z for zombie. And it's not listening, it's not going to respond to anything. It's stopped, it's paused is what it is. And if I want it to run in the background, I want to unpause it but still have my console, I type BG. That is the exact same thing as running it with an ampersand. It's just you can do it after the fact. Not that you need to know how to do any of this for this project, but it's just a cool, like, here's some cool stuff on the command prompt. Okay, and then foreground to bring it back, and Control C it, and now it's gone. Why do we need to know how to do all this, and why do we need to do this extra bit of work that's in my browser down here? Well, you see, if we just run this thing, it's running in this shell prompt. It is a child process of our SSH session. If I were to just exit right now or close my laptop or do anything else to lose connection to this server, it's going to close this SSH thread. And if it closes this SSH thread, then it's also going to close our Node.js process. We don't want it to, I would like to be able to log out of my computer and have my web server still running. That's kind of ideal, right? So then instead we go down and do this thing down here. We edit this file, which doesn't exist yet, right? So there is a system folder, there's a systemd and lib folder, but this project3 server.service does not exist, okay? So we're making it. And we're going to put these things into it. We're going to give it a description, some documentation. This is not the real documentation. We're going to give it an environment so we could actually pass in a different port if we wanted to. Our code is not reading that, but so you don't really need this line, but whatever. The more important thing are these two lines, these three lines here at the very 4 lines. Okay, these are the really important things. Type simple. This is how it's systemd actually starts up stuff. There's other options like running it as a daemon or something like that. Just use type simple. User Ubuntu. I talked about this at the very beginning of class. We don't want it to run as root. We want it to run as the Ubuntu user. We don't want it to have root privileges. Exec start. So when I say start, it's going to call the node process and it's going to pass in the path to our server script. The same thing as me doing node server.js, right? So this defines a service. And if I do quit out of here, we don't really have to do anything else. we can just start doing sudo service project 3 E3, there we go, server, and then start, right? And now it starts the server, it's running in the background. I can log out of my system and it's still running. If I modify my code, I can do a restart, right? All this is pretty cool. I would not suggest, and I know I only have like 1 minute left, so my parting, I would not suggest doing this while you're developing it. Do it when you're ready to turn it in. So while you're developing your project, I would have it stopped and I would just do node server.js. The reason is, right here, you're going to get any errors. Just like we got an error up here, it is readily available. You know exactly what's going on, what broke, when it broke. You don't have to go look around in log files and stuff like that. You can go find log files for the service, but it's kind of a pain. And I'm not really going to talk about how to do that today, but suffice to say, I heavily recommend while you're developing your Node.js code, you run it this way, and then you Control-C, and then you maybe SCP a file over, and then you run it again, and then you SCP a new version of the file over, and you run it again, or you vim it, and then run it again, all that stuff. Nginx doesn't care. You don't have to restart Nginx. It'll try to send stuff to port 3000, and for example, right now, if we go look at my browser, and we go talk to this dynamic endpoint, it's going to give us a 502 bad gateway. Nginx doesn't care. We don't need to restart Nginx every time we change our code or start and stop Node.js. It'll just say, hey, 502 bad gateway, I can't talk to the Node.js server. And it doesn't work. So I wholeheartedly suggest that while you're developing, you develop with Node server, and then when you're ready to actually log out and have it stay running and it's stable, then you just do a start, and then you can log out, and that's the end of my talk today. Anybody have any questions? If not, go and get out of here.
For the time requirement,
Yep.
Can we just use a date object, or do you want us to?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay, cool. Sounds good. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. I mean, it's kind of a short time period. It's due on Wednesday. I just want you guys to actually know what's going on for the next project. So it's kind of like a free 40 points, but so is the first project, free 35 points. So if you do it, you're at least learning something. Hopefully. Even rote memorization, you're going to pick up something by osmosis, right? I don't want to hear anybody complaining that it's due Wednesday, because I pretty much did it for you. Not hearing any other questions. Everybody's leaving. I'm out. See y'all on Wednesday.